Stop anyone on a street in Los Angeles and ask them one question. What earthquake are you afraid of? You will get the same two words every time. San Andreas, the famous fault, the big one, waiting out there in the desert, 40 miles from downtown. And here is the uncomfortable truth this entire video is built on. When they point toward the mountains, toward the San Andreas, they are pointing the wrong way. Because in 1999, scientists made a discovery that quietly rewrote the earthquake map of America's second largest city. A fault, 25 miles long, capable of a magnitude 7.5, running not past Los Angeles, not near Los Angeles, but directly underneath it, under the skyscrapers of downtown, under Hollywood, under millions of people, a fault with no line on the surface, invisible to anyone standing on top of it, which is exactly why it stayed hidden under the most studied city in seismology until the end of the 20th century. Scientists ran the numbers on what this fault can do, and the results were worse than the famous big one, not in size, but in body count. The government's own scenario for this fault projects casualties several times higher than the Great San Andreas rupture, for one simple reason. The San Andreas is a monster outside the walls. This monster is under the floor. This is the Puente Hills fault, and by the end of this video, you will understand why the most dangerous earthquake in America's future may come from a fault most Angelenos have never heard of, and why it has already introduced itself. Once, politely, in 1987. To understand how a giant fault hides under a giant city, you need to understand what kind of fault this is, because it breaks the rule everyone learns about earthquakes. The faults people know, like the San Andreas, reach the surface. They leave a scar you can see, a line across the desert, offset fences, a place you can stand and say, here it is. Geologists find them by walking the ground, and for a century, that is mostly how the earthquake maps of California were made. Walk the land, find the scars, draw the lines. It worked for the faults that show themselves. But there is another kind, a fault that never reaches the surface at all. A thrust fault, a ramp buried in the crust, where one block of rock is being shoved up and over another, driven by the same great collision of plates that bends this whole corner of the continent. And the whole structure lies flat enough, deep enough, that its top edge stops miles below the streets. No scar, no line, no warning. Scientists call them blind thrusts. And the name is honest in both directions. The fault is blind, and so are we. Everything above it looks like ordinary land. The only surface evidence is subtle beyond belief. Hills that rise a little too smoothly, layers that tilt where they should lie flat, clues measured in geometry, not scars. In Los Angeles, it looks like gentle hills, quiet neighborhoods, and the towers of a downtown skyline, all sitting on a loaded ramp nobody could see. So, how do you find an invisible fault? This is where the story becomes wonderfully strange, because the map that revealed the Puente Hills fault was not drawn by earthquake scientists. It was drawn by the oil industry. Los Angeles sits on one of the great oil basins of America, a fact the city has largely forgotten. A century ago, forests of wooden derricks stood where neighborhoods stand now, and even today, pumps still gnawed away behind fences and inside disguised buildings across the basin. For most of a century, petroleum companies fired sound waves into the ground and recorded the echoes, building detailed pictures of the rock layers below the city, looking for oil, assembling, without meaning to, one of the finest three-dimensional maps of the underground ever made anywhere on Earth. In the late 1990s, a team of researchers got access to that treasure of industrial data and began reading it for something else entirely. Not for oil, for danger. And there it was, in the folded layers under the basin, clear as an X-ray, a vast ramp structure, bending the rock above it, running for roughly 25 miles, from the hills of northern Orange County, under the San Gabriel Valley, under downtown Los Angeles, reaching toward Hollywood. The rock layers above the ramp were warped upward, and the deeper the researchers looked, the clearer the verdict became. This fault was not dead. The folding grew fresher toward the surface. The ramp had been slipping, over and over, through geologic time, each slip an earthquake, each earthquake pushing the hills above it a little higher. The gentle rises Angelenos drive over every day are the fault's growth rings. The city's own oil hunt had photographed the monster decades before anyone thought to look at the picture, and the city had already met this fault without knowing its name. October 1st, 1987, 7:42 in the morning, the heart of rush hour, freeways full, children arriving at school. A magnitude 5.9 earthquake strikes the Whittier Narrows area, east of downtown. The shaking lasts seconds, but it kills 8 people, injures hundreds, cracks buildings across the eastern basin, drops brick facades onto sidewalks, and does over $300 million of damage. In the town of Whittier itself, whole blocks of the old uptown district are wrecked. An ugly, deadly morning, but in the catalog of California quakes, a moderate one, the kind the region absorbs and forgets within a year. At the time, scientists could not assign it to any known fault, because the fault it came from was not on any map. The earthquake had come from nowhere, geologically speaking, and that bothered the researchers who studied it far more than the magnitude did. Years later, with the seismic data decoded, the truth emerged. Whittier Narrows was the Puente Hills fault, slipping on one small patch of its ramp. A 5.9, 8 deaths from a sliver of the structure, a few percent of its full area. The obvious question wrote itself. What happens when the whole ramp goes? Scientists answered that question the way this channel respects most. They built the scenario, rupture models, shaking maps, engineering analysis, casualty estimates, the full machinery of modern earthquake science, aimed at a magnitude 7 class rupture of the entire Puente Hills system. Walk through what the models describe. The rupture begins deep on the ramp and races along it for 25 miles, directly beneath the city, the shaking above it not arriving from somewhere, but erupting from below, everywhere along the corridor at once. Downtown, the towers ride it out. Modern high-rises are designed to bend and survive, but they empty their contents, ceilings, glass, everything unsecured, while the older buildings around their feet take the real blow. Across the basin, the soft ground amplifies the motion, and neighborhoods shake harder and longer than the raw magnitude would suggest. Tens of seconds of violent motion in the worst zones. Fires start by the hundreds, water mains break by the thousands, and the freeways, the city's arteries, close where overpasses fail, just as they did in Northridge, but across a far wider area. And the results of those studies made national news, because the numbers were worse than anyone expected, worse than the famous San Andreas scenario. The projected casualties ran from several thousand up toward the tens of thousands in the harshest versions, with economic losses in the hundreds of billions, among the costliest single disasters ever modeled for the United States. Read that again. A fault 1/3 the length of the southern San Andreas, producing a smaller earthquake, projected to kill several times more people. How is that possible? The answer is the entire lesson of this video, and it comes down to 3 brutal facts of geography. Fact 1. Depth. The San Andreas is 40 miles from downtown, and shaking weakens with distance. When the Great Desert Fault ruptures, its waves must travel across mountains and basin to reach the city, losing strength every mile, which is why the famous scenario projects severe but survivable shaking in most of Los Angeles proper. The Puente Hills ramp tops out just a few miles beneath the city, which means its energy arrives at full strength, with no distance to soften it, rising straight up into the streets. In the scenario maps, the zone of the most violent shaking, the red core that engineers fear, sits directly on top of downtown Los Angeles, not out in the desert, covering the exact square miles that hold the region's government, its transit hub, its hospitals, and its densest towers. It is the difference between a bomb outside the city walls and a bomb in the basement. Fact 2. The basin. Los Angeles is built on a deep bowl of soft sediment, thousands of feet of sand and clay washed down from the mountains over millions of years. Hard rock passes earthquake waves through and moves on. A soft basin traps them, slows them, stacks them, and shakes like a bowl of gelatin long after the rupture ends. And if you want proof of what the basin and a hidden fault can do together, Los Angeles already has it, branded into living memory. January 17th, 1994, 4:31 in the morning. A fault under the San Fernando Valley, unknown, unmapped, blind, ruptured in a magnitude 6.7. The Northridge earthquake. The shaking lasted barely 15 seconds. And in those 15 seconds, apartment buildings pancaked onto their own parking garages. Freeway interchanges collapsed onto the roads below. A hospital was knocked out of service. And some of the strongest ground motions ever recorded anywhere on Earth to that date were measured in an ordinary suburban valley. Dozens died, thousands were injured, and the bill ran to tens of billions. One of the costliest disasters in American history. From a moderate earthquake, on a fault science did not know existed until the morning it introduced itself. Northridge was the warning shot from the family of hidden faults. Puente Hills is the biggest member of that family, 3 times longer than the Northridge fault, capable of a rupture releasing several times more energy, positioned not under a suburban valley, but under the deepest, most populated part of the bowl. Fact 3. The buildings. Every city is a museum of its own building codes, and Los Angeles has whole generations of structures built before engineers understood what shaking does. The most feared are the older concrete buildings. Concrete frames without enough steel inside them, strong until they crack, and brittle when they do. Engineers have a chilling name for how they fail. They do not sway, they pancake, floor dropping onto floor, the building collapsing into its own footprint, the failure mode responsible for most earthquake deaths worldwide. There are on the order of 1,000 or more of these older concrete buildings across Los Angeles, offices, apartments, some of them landmarks, many sitting inside that red zone of maximum shaking, and engineers have known about them for decades, because the same building type killed people in Northridge, and in earthquakes around the world, from Mexico City to Christchurch. Add the soft-story apartment blocks perched over open parking, the aging brick, and the arithmetic of the scenario stops being abstract. The Puente Hills numbers are not high because the earthquake is enormous. They are high because a shallow, trapped, amplified rupture would shake the exact neighborhoods where the most vulnerable buildings stand, at full power, for what models suggest could be tens of seconds. Now, before this becomes a horror film, let us do what this channel always does, and put the honest frame around it. How often does this fault produce its great earthquake? Scientists answered that by drilling and trenching into the layers above the fault, reading the folded sediments the way we read tree rings, and identifying the fingerprints of its past great ruptures. The record shows a handful of full-scale events over the last 10,000 years or so, which means the giant earthquakes come, on average, many centuries, even more than 1,000 years, apart. The Puente Hills fault is not overdue in any meaningful sense. There is no ticking clock argument here, like the southern San Andreas, and in any given year, the odds of its maximum event are very small, far smaller than the yearly odds we discussed for the southern San Andreas. If you live in Los Angeles, the most likely strong earthquake of your lifetime is still a San Andreas rupture, or another moderate blind thrust event like Northridge or Whittier Narrows. The Puente Hills maximum is a low probability, high consequence event, the kind of risk humans are worst at thinking about, too rare to feel urgent, too devastating to ignore. Scientists do not lose sleep because it is likely this year. They lose sleep because the consequence side of the equation is the worst single earthquake scenario in the United States, and because the fault has already proven, in 1987, that it is awake. And here is the part of the story that deserves more credit than it gets. Los Angeles listened. In the years after the Puente Hills studies and the Northridge disaster, the city did something almost no American city has done. It passed laws with teeth, ordering the retrofit of thousands of its most dangerous buildings, the soft-story apartments, and the old concrete frames, not voluntary, mandatory, with deadlines stretching over decades. Tens of thousands of soft-story buildings have already been strengthened. Steel frames bolted into open parking floors across the city. Work you can see on almost any block of the older neighborhoods if you know what those fresh steel columns mean. The concrete retrofits are slower. They are expensive and hard. A single large building can cost millions to strengthen, and behind every deadline there are owners, tenants, and rents. The same collision of safety and money we found at Mammoth Lakes, playing out tower by tower. But the list exists. The law exists. And every completed building is a set of lives moved from one column of the scenario to the other. An earthquake early warning system now covers the region. Seconds of notice, pushed to every phone. None of this makes the city safe. All of it makes the city safer than it was. And the difference between those two words, in the Puente Hills scenario, is measured in thousands of people. So, 3 futures, the honest way to hold the fault under the city. Future 1, overwhelmingly the most likely in any year you pick. The ramp stays locked and silent, as it has for centuries. Los Angeles worries about traffic, fires, and the famous fault in the desert, while the hidden one under downtown does nothing at all. Most years are this year, and the great Puente Hills rupture may hold off for centuries more. Future 2, the middle path, and the one history actually shows us. Another moderate slip, another Whittier Narrows, a 5.9, maybe a 6.5, on one patch of the ramp or one of its hidden relatives. Because Puente Hills is not alone down there, the seismic imaging that found it has since revealed a whole family of blind thrusts threading beneath the basin, under the coast, under the west side, structures still being mapped and debated right now. Any of them can produce a Northridge, deadly, expensive, a hard week for the city, and a loud reminder from the family of blind thrusts that the basin's real earthquake problem was never only the San Andreas. Future 3, the full ramp, the scenario. Magnitude 7 class, directly beneath the core of the city, the basin ringing like a struck bowl, the old concrete tested all at once. It is the worst modeled earthquake in America. It is genuinely rare, and it is genuinely possible. That pairing, rare and possible, is the entire reason the retrofit laws exist, and the entire reason this video exists. Here is my honest opinion, after everything the research shows. The scariest thing about the Puente Hills fault is not the magnitude. It is the date of its discovery, 1999. Los Angeles was already a global metropolis. 8 decades of skyscrapers, freeways, millions of lives, all built and lived on top of a magnitude 7 fault that nobody knew existed. Generations were born, grew old, and died on that ramp without ever hearing its name. It was found late, by borrowed oil company data, under the most seismically studied city on the planet. That should humble everyone, because it forces one question. What else have we not found yet? Northridge was unknown until it ruptured. Puente Hills was unknown until someone looked at oil maps. 2 of the most consequential faults in American history, both invisible, both under a single city, both discovered within a decade of each other. The ground does not owe us a warning, and it does not file its faults with the city. Los Angeles thought its monster lived in the desert, and then found one asleep under the living room. The lesson of Puente Hills is the lesson of this whole channel. The map is never finished, and the most dangerous threat is always the one nobody has named yet. So now I want to hear from you. Be honest, had you ever heard of the Puente Hills fault before this video? Or was San Andreas the only name you knew? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. And if you are watching from Los Angeles, downtown, Hollywood, the San Gabriel Valley, Orange County, tell me your neighborhood, because I want to see how many of you are sitting directly on top of the ramp. If this video taught you something the movies never will, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And subscribe with notifications on, because next, we go back to the only volcano in modern American history that has actually killed, a mountain that swelled by 5 feet a day while scientists watched. And then, one Sunday morning, did something no one thought possible. It did not erupt upward, it erupted sideways. That story is next. The ground beneath America is speaking. Make sure you are listening.